Ho 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 ho. Ladies, gentlemen, gamers, and fellow anime enjoyers, welcome back. So, I've finally seen Grimgar, a fantasy and ash, and I'm here to talk about it. So, going into Grimgar, as per usual, was watching it with my friend, and even though I'm not going to be watching too much stuff in the coming future because of employment, Grimgar was one of the shows that got recommended to me, and we ended up watching it, me and my friend. And prior to seeing it, I really had no clue what this was about. I've never even heard of the show. Now, I will put forth a very big, not spoiler because I don't go into spoilers, and if I do, it's very, very light sprinkles. But one big thing about Grimgar going into it that was a little upsetting and kind of dampened the mood for me was the fact that there's no season two. And I was, kind of like, oh, okay, it's gonna be a short anime. It's a 12 episode anime. But I was kind of sad because I was like, okay, what if I like this and there's no season two? Now, we are in the era where an anime like Blue Exorcist, after 7 years of getting abandoned, did get another season. So it's not like it doesn't happen. But and I've been on the Reddit and I've seen people also want season two as well. But going into it, I knew this was going to be a short journey. But what is it a good one? And that's what we'll discuss. So, what is Grimgar of Fantasy and Ash? This is an anime that came out in 2016. So it's a little bit of an oldie, and it's crazy to think that was 8 years ago at this point. But it's a little bit of an old one, and you can definitely tell that by the way the anime is made. Now, I don't want to say that in terms of quality being old, right? It's not like it really lacked quality, but you could tell definitely with some parts where it's like, okay, I don't want to say it looks a little rough, but obviously it's not like current day fight scenes that are animated by Mappa or Ufotable, right? Like it's not going to be any of those. But there's definitely a certain charm, I think, that the anime has, especially with its backgrounds. Now, one of the major reasons why I've heard this thing is not getting a season two is because not the animating studio, but one of the art studios that made the backgrounds basically died. Like, not in the literal sense. I hope they're still all alive, but they basically ran out of business, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why Grimgar isn't getting a season two. But regardless, one thing I want to say initially is, the characters moving and all is cool, and it looks pretty basic and regular, but the backgrounds and just the art in general of the environments, even though it's from 2016, looked very, very unique, interesting, and good. And sometimes it does look a little simple, right? Like sometimes it looks rough where it somewhat looks like a sketch. Like it literally looks like an art sketch that's unfinished. But the color palette literally looks like it's made with like I forgot what they said it was. Oh my god, I saw it on the Reddit too, and it perfectly encapsulated it. It was either like colored pencils or pastel or I think maybe watercolors. But it's a very weird sort of look. And for any of those people out there that have played Kingdom Hearts and have been to the world with Winnie the Pooh, it oddly enough looks very similar to that. It almost looks like a children's book sort of coloring. Not in terms of quality, because children's book stuff has low quality, but this one is decent quality and it's very unique. And even though it's old, and you could tell it's old, it's not modern era, it's still good. But that has nothing to do with the story, so let's get into the story. So, what is Grimgar of Fantasy and Ash, right? Basically, it's an isekai. Now, the ironic part about this is usually in the isekai, one of two things happens. Either one, the person gets isekai'd and they're trying to get back to their world, or two, they get isekai'd and, sometimes it's into something fucking ridiculous like a vending machine, but other times it's basically them getting isekai'd as something extremely, extremely OP. Now, there are other isekais that do things differently because we've been bombarded with them, similar to zombie games. But here in Grimgar, and again, this is where we're getting into slight spoilers just for me to introduce the story here. In Grimgar, the characters are basically getting isekai'd, but that is one of the least things that matters in the story, and it's kind of weird, right? It's like, oh, why doesn't this big thing matter? They were from the real world, they reference the real world sometimes, but just with how the plot goes and what they choose to focus on this in this story, it really doesn't matter. And I'm like, wow, that's interesting. And it does come up somewhat. And even the characters question, the other world at some instances. But it is really a thing that literally has almost no relevance aside from them mentioning it once or twice. So I was like, oh, okay. So it's not an isekai where they're trying to go back. And it's definitely not an isekai where they're overpowered. So what is it? I'm tempted to call it almost a slice of life anime, but it does have its action. It's basically an anime just with its own little self-contained story, and I honestly don't know where it's going. And that's one of the charms, but also kind of one of the pain points. What this series does well, what the episodes do extremely well, is the fact that when there's stuff going on, it's good. And the character interactions and some of the fight scenes are especially good. But the main strongest point about this whole show is the story. The story, the character interactions, and the progression is really, really good. Now, it's not amazing, right? And that's the biggest thing I've thought about with the series now. Nothing in this show is done groundbreakingly new. Now, granted, I am watching it in 2024. It's not 2016. I'm sure for 2016 this was pretty good, and from what I saw on the Reddit, it really felt like it was that way for the people who actually watched it during that time. But I still think it holds up into current day. But this is where it doesn't do anything groundbreaking, and when it does do things, it does them pretty well. Like, you feel satisfied seeing when stuff actually happens. Now you'll notice why I'm using certain vocabulary here. When stuff actually happens. For a good majority of this anime, there's a lot of parts where it feels, for lack of a better term, soft. It feels like nothing is happening. And I was sitting there and I was like, okay, is this really what's going on? Nothing's happening. And I mean that almost in the literal sense, where the characters are just walking around, they're lazing around, they're relaxing, they're thinking. And there's a lot of downtime. And when there's not downtime, it's really good. Not the best ever, but it's really good. But there's a lot of downtime and there's a lot of just slice of life esque stuff. And I was like, okay, at certain points, especially in the beginning of the anime, I was like, is this a fighting anime? What exactly is this? And I was confused because there's not much fighting. The fighting that we're getting isn't even a fighting. It's like a fucking chicken with its head chopped off squirming around, and you kind of just want to put it out of its misery. And that's not in terms of animation or anything, just in terms of story relevance and what's going on in importance in the story. Now, this does pick up about midway, especially to the end of the anime, especially. Like, the ending was really good. But, and that's one of the things that, again, I have to give praise to the progression. But a lot of the middle, and especially the beginning, just feels kind of like a wet noodle. It feels like an unerected penis, and then as the story goes on, the penis gets erected and it stays erected, which is good. And I was shocked because, by the end of the anime, I was like, there's no way they're going to deal with these things. There's no way with the way the pacing has been going that, this is going to get resolved and we're going to see this and we're going to see that. And sadly, a lot of things that they do end up teasing a little bit don't really go anywhere because of lack of time. Because again, this is only one season. It's one season with 12 episodes, not even 24 or anything like that. So they do touch on other stuff, but I wouldn't even know how to describe this anime to you in terms of a genre aside from like a bootleg isekai for the first beginning to middle. It's very like it doesn't really find its footing, or I don't even want to call it setup because it does to do something good, which is establish characters and their relationships. But again, after they do it initially, and of the little sprinkles we get of actual interaction and relationship building, after that, most of it is just empty space. It's just like fluff, and I'm like, okay, why is this here? Now, another thing I did notice was there's a lot of fan service. And again, it's 2016, right? They had to stand out somehow, but oh mama, is there a lot of fan service. And sometimes they incorporate it well into the story. Sometimes it's done tastefully. Other times it's like, oh my god, what am I seeing? But it's something that as a man, I did somewhat enjoy, I'll be honest. But it's like, okay, damn, this is a little bit fan servicey, but not enough to be a detriment, at least for me. I could see it bothering some people though. But again, back to the story. So if you asked me for the story of Grimgar, right, aside from it being like an isekai where they basically get into an RPG fantasy world, and that's literally in the title of Fantasy and Ash, I don't really know how to describe to you the story. And that's not a bad thing per se, right? Again, I feel like for the beginning and middle, it's kind of just flopping around, like it doesn't know where it's going. But after it gets its footing and you get more like, okay, now that things have happened, now we have a concrete goal. And I feel like it gets better after that. Because in this world, again, it's very fantasy. Like there's goblins, there's kobolds, there's probably like a lich king somewhere, a demon king maybe. But for the most part, and again, this ties into the whole overarching story, which there really isn't none, at least right from what we saw in season one, where it's like, okay, how did the people get here? Oh, it doesn't really matter. Why are they here? Oh, well, they're here to fight the army. Well, no, realistically, they're here to live, and that's kind of a big part of the anime. They're just trying to live, and there's other stuff that happens that definitely draws their attention, but it's like imagine watching a main character come into the story, and instead of following the main character, because we do hear about other people that are relevant to the story that were there in the beginning, but for the most part we're following almost like the reject group. And it's cool to see the rejects, try and like make their way in the world and see how they do it. But it's like, as a person who enjoys power, and those of you who have seen my other reviews will know I really like OP characters, there's none of that here. And I'm like, what am I even watching? Again, it almost seems like you're watching the side characters that would never get their own animes and how they would do it. And you see for a certain reason why they don't get their own animes, because they're side characters for a reason, right? They're not the main character who's OP as shit. But again, that kind of gets rectified the more the story goes, and they actually find a footing. Now, one thing I was pretty sad about as well is, again, things were cut off, right? At episode 12, I mean, the anime had a really good ending, and again, the ending was extremely good. Like the final couple episodes, maybe like the past 4 to 5 final episodes, extremely good. They had a goal, they knew what they were doing. You see progression, you see more progression, you see a lot of stuff happening, twists, turns, surprises, not like crazy. And again, that's what I'm saying, like with the whole series. There's nothing crazy going on here, but everything they do when it actually gets done is done very well. So aside from that, one of the biggest complaints I have, and it's really hard to say this without potentially spoiling anything, so I'll try and keep it ambiguous, is there's something that happens in this story where the characters are very invested in this one thing. And when you watch the show, if you watch the show, you will know what I'm talking about. Where this one thing basically permeates the entire story, and it never leaves. It never leaves. It stays there, and they keep referencing it, they keep mentioning it, they keep going to it. It almost is like it's this thing's show. Like this show shouldn't be called Grimgar. It should be called this thing X. And I'm like, okay, this thing's always here. And again, I'm keeping it ambiguous for a big reason, but it's like, damn, this really became this thing's show. Like no one here feels like the main character. It feels like the main character is like somewhere else, and we're just again following the rejects and what they focus on, which again isn't what the main character would focus on. Again, not totally bad, and it's very confusing, but let's just say certain things drag on a little too long and permeate everything, and it's almost like, oh, you know essentially what would be done in this situation following this thing. And it's just always brought up, and it almost feels like its own mini arc within the anime. It's like, okay, damn, this is the main thing now, and it permeates for a while, and it never really leaves. It settles down, but it never really leaves. And again, I can't really get more specific than that, but I'm like, holy fuck, goddamn. But overall, right, after finishing Grimgar, after, getting through the whole series, finishing it, the fight scenes were pretty good, right? Again, nothing to write home about, but it's not like terrible quality now that we have the animes nowadays, which some are great, which they stay great, but not throughout the whole thing. Some are ass and they never get better. This is a very consistent anime in a lot of ways. Again, the beginning to middle isn't too good. There's a lot of just kind of waiting around for stuff to happen. It's almost a very chill, soft anime where it's very more slice of life in the beginning, and then afterward it does ramp up. And it's a neat little anime where it's like, if you don't have time, if you don't want to get invested into something like One Piece that's like 1,000+ fucking episodes, then this is the perfect series for you. And I think it's a little bit of a tragedy that they don't have another season. And we can hope all we want, but we also have to be realistic. But it is really sad, because when it does things well. And to kind of give a little bit of my closing thoughts here on how I felt about the whole thing, I felt good, but wanting more, but knowing it's not perfect and seeing a lot of its flaws. Again, certain things are not explored because of time. They really don't go into certain things that they do introduce, right? And I'll just say it plain out right here. This is, again, slight spoiler. There's elements of romance of this, and sometimes it's slightly pushed, and there's a lot of hinting, but there's a lot of pushing at certain intervals as well. but it just doesn't go anywhere because again, the anime is so short. The season's so short. I feel like this obviously happens, and from what I've heard from other people, this a lot more stuff gets developed later on, and that's the whole issue. It's later on. But I think the ending was very, very strong. Like where it ended, it almost made me want to like see like, okay, what happens next? I really want to see more. And it really teases you, and that's one of the biggest things, right? But the strengths are definitely like the unique art, especially the unique background art. I kept finding myself multiple times looking at the environments and saying, wow, like this shit looks really cool, really crazy. And that's a large part to do with the coloring. The coloring and the color palette and the style, extremely unique and good. And it's said that the alleged artist studio for that, that did that is out of business. So even if Grimgar does come back, it's probably not going to be the same as that. Which, we'll see how that is if it happens. But in general, it had great background, great coloring, great characters, extremely great progression where it's like, wow, to see where we started and to see where we ended, it's really like surprising and shocking, and it makes you feel for them. I just wanted more of everything. And again, beginning and middle, a little rough, a little bit, I don't want to say lazy, but a little bit just too chill, and kind of just nonsensical. Where it's like, where are we going? What are we doing? We're trying to find our footing. Stuff ends up happening, and then from the middle onward is things get more defined. They get more concrete. Like, okay, now we know what at least the immediate story is. We don't know what the overarching one is. And again, these people don't really question these things, and it feels just like they're aimlessly doing things in the beginning, but that gets solved later on. So great progression, great backgrounds, great characters, very nice interactions. The sad part and the negatives is just, beginning, middle is rough, and they just don't expand into more things that you would like to see expanded once you get invested. It's like you want to get more invested, but there's a cap on these things, and sadly, it looks like that's not going to ever be rectified anytime soon. So this is where when I thought to give this a rating, I really struggled, right? Because I was like, it's good at certain points, but when it's not good, it's kind of just like I'm sitting there and I'm waiting, which usually isn't a problem for me in many anime. But again, in this anime, there's times where I feel like literally nothing is happening. And there's multiple episodes I remember where in the middle of the episode, they started playing a song and just having sort of like, I don't even want to say a compilation, but when they play those anime songs and like, the characters are doing things, they're not really speaking and there's no fighting going on. It's just they're playing a song to kind of just show different characters doing different things over time. They did that like 3 to 4 times, and I was like, "What? What the fuck?" Like it's something you would leave at the end of the episode when you're doing the credits, but it's in the middle, and I'm like, nothing's happening, and I was so confused. So I'm gonna do something a little unique. I'm gonna give a midway rating. So to put it bluntly, I can't rate this series above a 7. But also because of the negative points, which again aren't too negative, I don't want to rate it a 6.5 because it is pretty good, but a 7 because it's not that good when it's bad. So I'm sticking with a 6.7 out of 10 Grimgars. And I really struggled, but I was like, okay, this is definitely the best middle ground. And for those of you who don't know my rating system, 5 out of 10 is net neutral. 5 out of 10 is like, okay, I didn't care. It was not great. It was not good. It was not bad. It was not terrible. It's like, okay, I was there and I saw it and I don't really feel anything. This is good. This is definitely a good anime that obviously has its very obvious issues, but it's good when it is. When it is good, it's nice and sweet and it's short. And that's basically it. 6.7 out of 10 Grimgars. And, which again, if it's above 5, it's good. But that's basically it. If you've seen it, please let me know, because I feel like this is a little bit of a niche anime. And if you haven't, hopefully you'll be interested to try, because overall, I would recommend it. And if you enjoyed, I hope you watch me at Twitch TV/Technics channel. I hope everyone enjoyed.